Phyllis is someone who demands attention, so this is very comfortable for her. I know.
I think I'm more nervous talking to you in our conversations, and we've talked, you know, if we've talked once, we've talked 100 times.
Yeah.
And now doing it in front of this crowd makes me nervous.
No, I got a sense of that through the few 100 conversations and emails we've had in the last few days. But just so people know, you come from an immigrant family.
Yes.
Grew up in Chicago.
Right.
So so English was your language, but your folks spoken in other languages as well.
Yeah, and Yiddish.
And Yiddish, yes. Yes.
And my father in Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, even though she was born in Poland, knew no Polish, only Yiddish.
Yeah, so, that was not uncommon.
Yeah.
That was not uncommon among Jewish families. You went to high school in Chicago, and you went to college on what is now Navy Pier. It was Navy Pier then, I guess, too, but it was a University of Illinois campus then.
Mm-hmm. And then after a year and a half at Navy Pier, transferred down to UVI in Champaign.
So tell me when it became, you would get a master's down there as well in language and speech and language pathology. Mm-hmm. But what was it? When did the light go on that this is the work that you wanted to do? What caused you to want to do it?
Well, so those of you that are old enough to know this, in the 50s, you know, what women did when they went to college, they became teachers or nurses. We didn't have too much choice. My father was a feminist and thought I should be a civil engineer. Thank goodness I did not listen to him. So I went to the Pier not knowing what I wanted to do. And then one of my older brother's friends was studying speech pathology, and I said, what is that? You know, because I'd never needed one in grammar school, and I never really, I think maybe in Chicago public schools, there weren't very many at that time. And so I researched that and decided that maybe I'll try it because I like to work with kids, but I like to work with them on a one-on-one basis. And I wanted to see how that felt. And when I went down to Champaign and walked into the speech clinic there, which was an old house that had belonged to the sculptor Laredo Taft, and in the basement there was a big tree trunk that held the place up. And then I walked into a therapy room, and I just knew I was home. There were 14 of us in our class, and it just spoke to me, and that I could work with both, and at that time, both adults and children.
And what about those interactions spoke to you?
Well, I think that it was, actually my master's thesis was on adult aphasia, work with people with strokes, and the ability to communicate, that was the thing that spoke to me the most, is that here were people that had communicated and couldn't anymore, or there were children that you felt could communicate if they were given the proper treatment, and working with those, that very elemental thing that makes us human was a thing that that got to me.
You and Dave came back to Chicago, and you worked in schools, public and private schools, and you taught at Elmhurst College. You taught at the University of Illinois, and you became interested in hyperlexia. How did that become? First of all, explain for those who don't know what it is, and how did that become an interest of yours?
Okay, so so I was the transition back to Chicago was after Dave finished his PhD, and I had been already working. You know, it took a long time. Jeff was already born. We thought we were going to come back a lot sooner than that, but you know, and then after a while I started teaching at Elmhurst College, and my colleague, the late Sally Bly, and I had this idea that we would work with these children that were diagnosed with autism, and we trained in a method called TheraPlay, which was very intensive play, and and very involved with families. And we got some media attention, and the more media attention we got, the more kids we saw, and we said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could start a place that worked with these children and their families in this very involving play that sort of evolved to the kind of therapy we did with Laura.
Now, autism, the prevalence of autism wasn't as well known back then.
Oh no, it was, at that time it was said to be 1 in 10,000. Now it's said to be 1 in 59 in the latest CDC. Part of that's because of better diagnosis and a different definition over the years. But now it's really pretty common. And in those days, the children that we saw were the most severe autistic children, because those were the ones that were diagnosed with that. And kids with neurological issues and developmental issues, and kids with epilepsy, obviously, and you know, so that's that. So then one day, going back to your question, now that I remembered that you asked me one.
That's all right. I'm just here to help.
So one day, a parent brought in a child, barely verbal, diagnosed with autism. And we were talking, and he dropped a bunch of crayons on the floor as we were talking. And he seemed occupied with the crayons, and we, after a while, looked down, and he had taken the crayons and spelled Ponderosa Steakhouse.
Oh my goodness.
The parents hadn't really realized he could do this, and I was going, I had never seen this before. So we researched it. This was before computers, guys, I'm sorry, in 1979, 1980, I mean, you couldn't just go on in the internet and find everything.
It was before computers, but not before Ponderosa Steak.
But not, right, that's true. Many things, Ponderosa Steakhouse, that's still around? I don't know.
I don't know.
But
apparently it is.
Computers are. But a grandmother of one of the kids was a librarian, and she did a search for us to find did you ever see children with autism that could spell? And came across the literature about hyperlexia. And so hyperlexia, which occurs both in autism and in other developmental disabilities, is the ability to precociously read within the context of this other disability. And you know, so here we saw kids at 2 and 3 and 4 who could decode words and could read and spell and memorize numbers and memorize things that they saw on television. And we said, well, we can't just ignore that ability and work on the problems, but we should incorporate that ability, and maybe we could use it in therapy to help them talk and communicate better.
And how did you do that? I know that there have been lectures all over the world that you've given on this. So, given the fact that we have limited time, maybe
but,
boil it down to the essentials here.
So the idea really is to use the strengths to develop the weaknesses. And where are you, Christina? Christina Reese is one of the therapists that was with us in the early years of looking at this, and she and I and the number of therapists that were around at that point were able to develop basically the idea of using the writing to support the learning of language. So we would write out what the child would need to say, we would write the question and write the answer, and then they would memorize that. And so they were having difficulty processing language, but they could read and then would memorize the language and then be able to gradually transfer that into things that they could actually say and use in a conversation.
And were people was this being done elsewhere, or?
Not really. There were some people that were talking. There's a little bit of literature. The literature didn't always agree with everything, but there is a little bit of literature, and it seemed like people would get interested in this and then they wouldn't get funding to continue it. And we talked to a lot of those people who wrote the early articles, and it was first actually coined, the word was coined in 1967, I think, or 1967. So it was relatively new at that time, and not very many people had seen more than one of these kids. And as we began to study it, and then we got some more publicity, and we went out and gave talks all around Chicago and then around the country and at conventions and things like that. And we began to see more and more of these kids. So we've seen hundreds of these kids, and still parents come from all over the country because they can't find anybody who's ever seen one before. And so we began to gain a lot of experience in working with these particular children.
So that you learned, you had a breakthrough observation from this child who spelled out Ponderosa Steakhouse. What else have you learned? I think everybody in this room who has had experiences with you can speak to what their children have learned from you. What have you learned from working with these kids?
Yeah, that's always a good question, because I always feel that with every child I've learned something. I've learned to listen and watch. I've learned to work with parents of the children and really listen to what the parents have to say. I learned all kinds of facts about planets and and how high every single roller coaster is in every single amusement park in the country. And I've learned a lot about the periodic table of elements, and then some practical things. Actually, from your daughter, I learned how to fold
Yes.
Fitted sheets.
Yeah, which is not easy.
Which is a skill I did not have until she taught it to me.
Yeah.
She's really very good at it.
Yeah, yeah. Now your sons, Jeff and Justin, are here. Were they the beneficiaries of all these learnings? Did you?
Yes, and actually Justin remembers, when we first learned this, Theraplay is a very playful thing that parents can do with their children. And we would sit and do row, row, row your boat. And Justin just reminded me that he remembers doing this at, 3 and 4 years old, especially when he was having tantrums. Not that he did or anything.
All right, now he's saying TMI. One of the things, one of the things that I've always loved about you is that it was so clear that you were in this for the work, for the people you were working with and helping. The flip side of that was I never thought of you much as a business person.
Well, that was certainly my weakness.
Yeah.
But because I always thought if you did really good work and let people know that and talk to referral if you did good work, it would happen. But of course, it doesn't happen that way.
Well, and then you have downturns in the economy. And you're impacted by that because people don't have the resources.
That's right. So we struggled during the most recent recession, that's for sure. But we did other things. We ran about 25 conferences for people. We got some grants to do some evaluations of kids in daycare centers. I think that some of our success came from doing the good work. We were on primetime live national television. But
so you were a rock star, actually.
So sort of.
Yeah. But you did have fundraisers, because I remember those fundraisers, yes. But none quite like this. So this is evidence of progress. In 2008, the center evolved and changed in a new partnership and arrangement. Talk about that transition and how we got to where we are today.
Okay, so we had always been a clinical program where parents brought their kids to the clinic, and we had done that, and then we did a little bit of outreach to the schools and things like that. But so in 2008, things were, in the years that followed, I know you were very involved in trying to get things going in terms of the whole country, but we then were really struggling, and I was very seriously concerned that we would have to close our doors, and because families could not afford to come to get outside services very much, even if insurance paid some. So then we were very lucky to find an executive director, Lynn, who also put us in contact with her original employer in Buffalo, the Buffalo Hearing and Speech Center, and that became a partnership that allowed us to continue. And then 2 years ago, when Lynn left to raise her ever-growing family, Corrine came to our door, and in the last 2 years, the services that we provide now in charter schools, having our therapists go out, in addition to the clinical program, has grown exponentially. And I have to thank Corrine not only for putting together this wonderful fundraiser, but for really helping the center to find a new future and to broaden our scope and not just work with children, but as Andrew said a few minutes ago, that we would serve populations that in new ways, and I'm very excited about the future. My dream has always been to have the center exist beyond me, and...
Wait a second.
Yes.
What do you mean? Where are you going?
I'm not going anywhere. Actually, I spend a little time...
well, I wanted to ask you about that, actually, because it seems to me that you have such a gift for using all the tools, front of the brain and back of the brain, to break through, especially with young people who are hard to reach. And I will always remember your interactions with Lauren when she was so difficult to reach. And I guess you're still involved in training. How many therapists did you have when you began?
Well, there was Sally and myself. There were two. And then we had some students that worked with us, and then it grew. You know, I think the largest group of therapists we had was about 8.
And how many do you have today?
I think 19 or 20, right?
We're including you.
A lot. But that's thanks to all the therapists and you know, here's the thing that I love about what's happening today. Even though, and all you young therapists who weren't born in 1979, who work for
you said none of them were born in 1979.
who work for Chat right now are so enthusiastic. Karine had a little party at the end of the summer and the beginning of the school year, and I was so taken with how much fun and how much laughter there was at that party when all the young therapists got together. And I love the enthusiasm and the passion that they show. I have passion for the work that I did, but it's wonderful to see the next generation have as much passion for what they're wanting to do as I did at that time.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I'm sure you take great pride in where this has come for 40 years. I see Chuck Wolf over here, who was the first chairman of your board, I understand.
No, on the advisory board first.
On the advisory board.
Yeah, right.
So I invested him with more authority than I should have.
Yeah,
in any case, he was there.
I should also mention there's a couple people who have been just wonderful board members for many years. Liz Stefanski and Sarah Popel were very loyal board members. We pulled in a bunch of people related to Argonne National Lab because David worked there. That's where our friends were. And so our friends were on the board a lot and in serving in many ways. And it was wonderful from the beginning. We attracted community people to our mission, and so many people have helped us along the way to support us through our mission. And I'm very grateful for that because I didn't do it all myself, that's for sure.
Yeah, but you did a lot, Phyllis. I just on behalf of every parent here whose child and whose family's life you helped, I just want to close by saying that we love you and we appreciate you. And even though our daughter now talks incessantly, and there are times when I actually am angry at you. We owe you more than we could ever repay. And I just want to say congratulations. Oh, you got more to say, I can see.
No, I was just going to say, but Lauren loves to beat me in bowling.
Yes, and she's good at that.
She's
but
good at that.
I just want to say congratulations. This is an extraordinary achievement, what you created and the lives that you've touched, and by extension, all of the people who are working at Chat today are touching. What an extraordinary legacy, so congratulations.
Yeah, I'm thrilled. Thank you. Thank you for being here.